The grand ballroom of the Rosewood Hotel buzzed with excitement as 300 guests waited for the wedding ceremony to begin. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white roses and golden ribbons that decorated every corner. The bride's family had spared no expense for what they called the wedding of the century. Elena Martinez stood at the altar in her custom-designed gown, her hands trembling slightly as she held her bouquet. She had dreamed of this moment since childhood, but something felt terribly wrong. The groom's side of the chapel remained almost empty. With only a few scattered guests occupying the ornate wooden pews, Marcus Chen, dressed in an expensive black tuxedo, should have been standing beside the officiant by now. Instead, he was nowhere to be seen. Elena's father, Roberto Martinez, kept checking his gold watch and whispering urgently to the wedding planner. The minutes ticked by slowly and murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. "Where is he?" Elena's mother, Carmen, hissed from the front row, her face flushed with embarrassment. The Martinez family owned one of the most successful textile companies in the region, and this public humiliation was unthinkable. Elena's phone buzzed in her clutch. With shaking fingers, she pulled it out and read the message that would shatter her world. "I'm sorry, Elena. I can't go through with this. I've realized I don't love you the way you deserve. I'm leaving the country tonight. Please forgive me. Marcus." The bouquet slipped from Elena's hands and hit the marble floor with a soft thud. White petals scattered around her feet like fallen snow. The wedding guests began to whisper more loudly, some standing up to get a better view of the drama unfolding at the altar. "He's not coming," Elena whispered to her father, showing him the message. Roberto's face turned red with anger and humiliation. The Martinez family had invested heavily in this wedding, not just financially but socially. They had invited their biggest business partners, competitors, and clients. As the reality of the situation sank in, Elena felt her knees go weak. She had given up a promising job opportunity in New York to marry Marcus. She had turned down other suitors, believing that Marcus Chen was her soulmate. Now, standing alone at the altar in front of hundreds of people, she felt like a fool. The wedding planner approached cautiously, asking in a hushed voice what they should do about the guests, the reception, and the expensive catering that was already being prepared in the adjacent hall. The photographer continued taking pictures, documenting what would become the most embarrassing day of Elena's life. Roberto Martinez stood up and addressed the crowd with as much dignity as he could muster. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that due to unforeseen circumstances, today's ceremony has been postponed indefinitely." His voice carried across the silent ballroom, and the guests began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Elena gathered the train of her wedding dress and walked quickly down the aisle, ignoring the pitying looks and whispered conversations of the guests. Her bridesmaids followed behind her, their colorful dresses a stark contrast to the somber mood that had settled over the celebration. In the bridal suite, Elena sat staring at herself in the mirror, still wearing her wedding dress. The veil that had taken hours to arrange now felt like a mockery. Her makeup artist had spent the morning creating the perfect look, but now black mascara streaked down her cheeks. Her best friend Maria knocked on the door and entered quietly. "Elena, I'm so sorry. How could he do this to you? How could Marcus just disappear without any explanation?" Elena wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. "He said he doesn't love me the way I deserve. But Maria, we've been together for 3 years. We planned our whole future together. How can someone just change their mind like that?" The truth was even more painful than Elena realized. Marcus Chen hadn't just gotten cold feet about marriage. He had been secretly seeing someone else for months, a woman from his business circle who came from an even wealthier family than the Martinez. He had been too cowardly to break up with Elena properly, so he chose the cruelest possible moment to abandon her. Outside the hotel, cars were already leaving the parking lot as guests made their excuses and departed. The Martinez family was left to deal with the aftermath of the failed wedding, including canceling the honeymoon reservations, returning gifts, and facing the social embarrassment that would follow them for months. Elena's younger brother Carlos found her in the bridal suite an hour later. "Elena, Papa wants to know if you want to proceed with the reception anyway. The food is already prepared and some guests are still here." "No," Elena said firmly, standing up and beginning to remove her veil. "I want everyone to leave. I want to forget this day ever happened." But even as she said those words, Elena knew she would never forget. The humiliation, the betrayal, and the public embarrassment would stay with her forever. What she didn't know was that among the guests who had witnessed her heartbreak was someone who would later play a crucial role in her life. As the evening shadows grew longer, Elena Martinez sat alone in the empty ballroom, still in her wedding dress, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been the happiest day of her life. The white roses were already beginning to wilt, and the golden ribbons looked tarnished in the dim light. She made a silent promise to herself that night. She would never again allow anyone to make her feel so powerless and humiliated. She would rebuild her life, her confidence, and her future on her own terms. Elena Martinez would emerge from this devastation stronger than ever before, though she had no idea how dramatically her life was about to change. 6 months after the wedding disaster, Elena Martinez threw herself into work with an intensity that surprised everyone around her. She had returned to her family's textile company, Martinez Industries, with a determination to prove that she was more than just a victim of a broken engagement. The company headquarters buzzed with activity every morning as Elena arrived before dawn, staying late into the evening to review contracts, meet with suppliers, and develop new business strategies. Her father Roberto watched with pride and concern as his daughter transformed her pain into professional ambition. "Elena, you're working too hard," her mother Carmen said one evening as they sat in the family dining room. "You need to take some time to heal, maybe travel, meet new people." "Work is healing me, Mama," Elena replied, not looking up from the financial reports spread across the table. "Every successful deal, every new client, every dollar we earn makes me stronger." The truth was that Elena had discovered a natural talent for business that had been overshadowed by her previous focus on marriage and social expectations. She found herself energized by the challenge of negotiating contracts, developing marketing strategies, and building relationships with international buyers. Martinez Industries specialized in high-quality fabrics for luxury fashion brands, but Elena saw opportunities to expand into new markets. She spent her weekends researching sustainable textile production, studying consumer trends, and developing plans for modernizing their manufacturing processes. One particularly busy Thursday morning, Elena was reviewing supplier agreements when her assistant knocked on her office door. "Ms. Martinez, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's about a potential partnership." Elena glanced at her calendar, which was already packed with meetings. "Tell him to schedule an appointment for next week. I don't have time today." "I tried, but he's quite insistent. He says he's Alexander Knight from Knight Industries, and he'll only take a few minutes of your time." Elena's pen stopped moving across the contract she was signing. Knight Industries was one of the largest investment firms in the country, known for acquiring and transforming struggling businesses. She had read about Alexander Knight in business magazines, a self-made billionaire who had built his empire through strategic acquisitions and innovative management approaches. "Send him in," she said, quickly straightening her blazer and clearing some papers from her desk. Alexander Knight entered her office with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp green eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the room instantly. His expensive suit was perfectly tailored, and his presence filled the space with an energy that Elena found both intimidating and intriguing. "Ms. Martinez," he said, extending his hand with a slight smile, "thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I know how valuable your time is." Elena shook his hand, noting his firm grip and the way he maintained eye contact. "Mr. Knight, I have to admit I'm curious about what brings someone of your stature to our modest operation." Alexander sat down in the chair across from her desk, his movements deliberate and controlled. "I've been researching textile companies in this region, and Martinez Industries caught my attention. Your recent growth numbers are impressive, especially considering the challenges facing traditional manufacturing." Elena felt a flutter of pride but kept her expression professional. "We've been fortunate to maintain good relationships with our clients and suppliers, but I'm sure you didn't come here just to compliment our financial performance." "You're right," Alexander said, leaning forward slightly. "I'm interested in exploring a partnership. Knight Industries is looking to diversify our portfolio, and the textile industry presents interesting opportunities, particularly with the growing demand for sustainable and ethically produced materials." For the next hour, they discussed market trends, production capabilities, and potential collaboration strategies. Elena found herself impressed by Alexander's knowledge of the industry and his thoughtful questions about their operations. He didn't talk down to her or dismiss her ideas, which was refreshing after dealing with some of their more traditional business partners. "I'd like to propose a more detailed discussion," Alexander said, as their meeting wound down. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation over dinner. I find that business relationships often develop better in a more relaxed setting." Elena hesitated for a moment. Since the wedding disaster, she had avoided any social situations that could be interpreted as romantic, but this was clearly a business opportunity, and Alexander Knight's reputation was impeccable. "Dinner would be fine," she agreed. "Somewhere quiet where we can discuss the details without interruption." "Perfect. I'll have my assistant make reservations at Romano's for tomorrow evening. It's a small restaurant, but the food is excellent and the atmosphere is conducive to business discussions." After Alexander left, Elena sat in her office thinking about the unexpected meeting. Knight Industries had the resources and connections that could take Martinez Industries to the next level. A partnership with them could open doors to international markets and provide the capital needed for expansion. That evening, Elena called her father into her office to discuss the potential opportunity. Roberto listened carefully as she explained Alexander's proposal, his experienced businessman's instincts analyzing every aspect of the situation. "This could be exactly what we need to grow the company," Roberto said thoughtfully. "But Elena, be careful. Men like Alexander Knight don't make decisions based on emotion or sentiment. If he's interested in our company, he has very specific reasons and they might not align with our family's interests." Elena nodded, understanding her father's caution. "I know, Papa. But this could also be our chance to build something bigger than we ever imagined. I won't let personal feelings cloud my judgment." As she prepared for the dinner meeting the next day, Elena chose her outfit carefully, a professional but elegant black dress that conveyed competence without being overly formal. She reviewed her notes about Knight Industries and prepared talking points about Martinez Industries' potential for growth. Standing in front of her bedroom mirror, Elena reflected on how much her life had changed since that terrible day at the altar. The broken-hearted woman in a wedding dress had evolved into a confident businesswoman ready to negotiate with one of the most powerful men in the industry. She didn't know that Alexander Knight had been at her failed wedding 6 months earlier, sitting in the back row as a guest of a business associate. He had watched the entire humiliating scene unfold and had been quietly investigating her family's company ever since. Tonight's dinner was not just about business. It was the beginning of a carefully orchestrated plan that would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could yet imagine. Romano's restaurant was exactly as Alexander had described, intimate, elegant, and perfect for serious business discussions. Elena arrived precisely on time, wearing her carefully chosen black dress and carrying a leather portfolio filled with detailed information about Martinez Industries. Alexander was already seated at a corner table, reviewing documents on his tablet. When he saw Elena approach, he stood and pulled out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy that impressed her despite herself. "You look lovely," he said simply, his green eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to a professional demeanor. "I took the liberty of ordering wine. I hope you don't mind." "Not at all," Elena replied, settling into her seat and placing her portfolio on the table. "I brought detailed financial reports and production data that might help you understand our capabilities better." As they ordered dinner, their conversation flowed naturally from business topics to more personal subjects. Alexander asked thoughtful questions about her background, her education, and her vision for the future of Martinez Industries. Elena found herself sharing more than she had intended, drawn in by his genuine interest and intelligent observations. "You mentioned earlier that you recently took on more responsibility in the family business," Alexander said as their appetizers arrived. "What motivated that change?" Elena paused, unsure how much personal information to share in a business setting. "Let's just say that life circumstances made me realize I needed to focus on building my own future rather than depending on others." Alexander nodded understanding, and something in his expression suggested he knew more about her situation than he was letting on. Sometimes the most difficult experiences teach us the most valuable lessons about ourselves. As the evening progressed, Elena noticed that Alexander seemed to know an unusual amount about her company's operations, their suppliers, and even some of their internal challenges. When she mentioned a recent problem with a fabric shipment from their overseas supplier, Alexander immediately suggested a solution. Based on his experience with similar issues, you seem remarkably well informed about the textile industry for someone whose primary focus is financial investments. Elena observed, studying his face carefully. Alexander smiled, but there was something guarded in his expression. I make it a point to research any industry thoroughly before considering an investment. Knowledge is the foundation of successful business relationships. After dinner, as they walked to the restaurant's parking area, Alexander presented his formal proposal. I'd like to offer Martinez Industries a partnership that would provide significant capital investment in exchange for a controlling interest in the company. This would allow you to expand internationally while maintaining operational control of day-to-day activities. Elena felt her heart rate increase. A controlling interest meant that Alexander would ultimately own her family's company, even if she remained in charge of operations. That's a significant step, Mr. Knight. I'd need to review the details carefully with my father and our legal team. Of course, Alexander agreed smoothly. I wouldn't expect an answer tonight. Take all the time you need to consider the proposal. I believe this partnership could benefit both of us tremendously. As Elena drove home that night, her mind raced with questions and possibilities. The partnership Alexander was offering could transform Martinez Industries into a major player in the global textile market. But something about the evening felt too convenient, too perfectly orchestrated. The next morning, Elena called an emergency meeting with her father and their longtime attorney, James Morrison. She presented Alexander's proposal in detail, watching as both men's expressions grew increasingly concerned. Elena, James said slowly, this offer is generous, almost too generous. Knight Industries doesn't typically invest in small family businesses unless they see exceptional potential or have specific strategic reasons. Roberto nodded in agreement. The terms seem fair on the surface, but giving up controlling interest means we could lose everything if things go wrong. What do we really know about this man's intentions? Elena spent the next week conducting her own research into Alexander Knight and his business practices. What she discovered was both impressive and troubling. Alexander had acquired dozens of companies over the past decade, transforming most of them into highly profitable enterprises. However, several of the original owners had been forced out after disagreements about the company's direction. The more Elena learned about Alexander, the more she realized that his interest in Martinez Industries might not be purely financial. She discovered that Knight Industries had recently acquired several companies in related industries, suggesting he might be building a comprehensive supply chain empire. On Friday afternoon, Elena's assistant brought her a large bouquet of white roses with a simple card. Thank you for a lovely evening. I look forward to working together. Alexander. Elena stared at the flowers, remembering how white roses had decorated her failed wedding. The coincidence seemed too significant to ignore, and a chill ran down her spine as she wondered if Alexander knew more about her personal history than he had admitted. That weekend, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She called Alexander's office and requested another meeting, this time at Martinez Industries headquarters. If he was going to acquire her family's company, she wanted him to see exactly what he would be getting. Mr. Knight, she said when he arrived Monday morning, before we proceed with any business arrangement, I need to ask you a direct question. Did you know who I was before you walked into my office last week? Alexander's green eyes held her gaze steadily. Yes, Elena, I knew exactly who you were. The admission hung between them like a challenge. Elena felt her professional composure wavering as the implications of his words sank in. How long have you known? I was at your wedding, Alexander said quietly. I saw what happened to you that day. I saw how that coward humiliated you in front of everyone you cared about. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she processed this revelation. So this whole business proposal, the dinner, the partnership offer, it's all been some kind of elaborate setup? No, Alexander said firmly. The business opportunity is real, Elena. Martinez Industries has genuine potential and my offer is legitimate. But I'll admit that watching what happened to you that day made me want to know more about the woman who could stand with such dignity in the face of public humiliation. Elena stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the factory floor where her family's employees worked steadily at their machines. "I don't know what game you're playing, Mr. Knight, but I won't be anyone's charity case or psychological experiment. That's not what this is," Alexander said, his voice carrying a note of urgency that Elena hadn't heard before. "Elena, you impressed me long before I ever met you. The way you handled that situation, the way you've rebuilt your life and strengthened your family's business, that takes remarkable character." Elena turned to face him, her dark eyes flashing with anger and confusion. "So what happens now? Do I accept your offer and spend the rest of my life wondering if it was based on pity? Do I reject it and lose the opportunity to save my family's legacy?" Alexander stood and moved closer to her, his expression serious and sincere. "You accept it because it's the right business decision. You accept it because you're strong enough to succeed regardless of my motivations. And maybe, eventually, you accept it because you realize that some of the best relationships begin in the most unexpected ways." 3 months after signing the partnership agreement with Knight Industries, Elena's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The injection of capital and Alexander's business connections had opened doors to international markets that Martinez Industries had only dreamed of accessing. Elena found herself traveling frequently, meeting with luxury fashion designers in Milan, sustainable textile buyers in Amsterdam, and manufacturing partners across Asia. Each successful deal boosted her confidence and proved that her instincts about the business had been correct. But the most unexpected change was her evolving relationship with Alexander Knight. What had begun as a purely professional arrangement had gradually developed into something more complex and personal. He seemed to appear whenever she needed support, offering advice, connections, or simply a listening ear after difficult negotiations. "Elena, the Milan contracts are finalized," her assistant Maria announced as Elena returned from a particularly challenging meeting with European buyers. "And Mr. Knight called to congratulate you on closing the Amsterdam deal. He wants to take you to dinner tonight to celebrate." Elena paused in sorting through her mail, noticing an elegant envelope with her name written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a wedding invitation. Marcus Chen was marrying Isabella Westbrook, the woman he had abandoned Elena for. The ceremony would take place in 3 weeks at the most exclusive country club in the city. Elena stared at the invitation, surprised by how little emotion she felt. 6 months ago, receiving this would have devastated her. Now it seemed like news from a different lifetime, about people who were no longer relevant to her world. "Maria, please confirm dinner with Mr. Knight for 8 o'clock, Elena said, tossing the invitation into her trash can without another thought. "And schedule a conference call with our new Tokyo clients for tomorrow morning." That evening at dinner, Alexander noticed Elena seemed more relaxed and confident than he had seen her before. The successful expansion into European markets had given her a new sense of accomplishment and self-assurance that was evident in everything from her posture to her smile. "You've built something remarkable here," Alexander said as they reviewed the quarterly reports over wine. "Martinez Industries has grown by 40% in just 3 months. Your father must be incredibly proud." "He is," Elena agreed, then looked up at Alexander with a direct gaze. "But I want to know something honestly. Are you proud of the business results, or are you proud that your charity project succeeded?" Alexander set down his wine glass and leaned back in his chair. "Elena, when are you going to stop thinking of yourself as my charity project? You've proven repeatedly that you're a brilliant businesswoman. These successes are entirely your own. Then why does it sometimes feel like you're watching me like an experiment?" Elena asked. "Like you're waiting to see how the broken woman from the wedding disaster will handle success?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "I'll admit that initially I was intrigued by your strength in handling that situation. But Elena, spending these months working with you has shown me something completely different. You're not a victim who overcame adversity. You're a natural leader who was temporarily distracted by the wrong priorities." Elena felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine they were sharing. "And what are the right priorities?" "Building something that belongs to you, creating value that no one can take away, surrounding yourself with people who appreciate your intelligence rather than trying to diminish it." As they talked, Elena realized that Alexander had never once mentioned Marcus or the failed wedding since that first honest conversation in her office. He had focused entirely on her future, rather than dwelling on her past, which was something she hadn't experienced with anyone else in her life. The next morning, Elena arrived at the office to find her father waiting with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Elena, we need to talk," Roberto said, closing her office door behind him. "I've been doing some research into Alexander Knight's other business acquisitions, and I've discovered some concerning patterns." Elena sat down at her desk, giving her father her full attention. "What kind of patterns?" "In several cases, Knight Industries has acquired companies, improved their operations and profitability, and then sold them to larger corporations at significant profits. The original owners were bought out, often at much higher valuations than their original investment, but they lost control of the businesses they had built." Elena felt her stomach tighten. "Are you suggesting that Alexander's plan is to flip our company for a profit?" "I'm suggesting that we need to be prepared for that possibility," Roberto said carefully. "Alexander Knight is a businessman first, Elena. No matter what personal feelings might be developing between you two, he has a responsibility to his investors to maximize returns." That afternoon, Elena confronted Alexander directly about her father's concerns. They met in the conference room at Martinez Industries, with the quarterly reports and expansion plans spread across the mahogany table between them. "Alexander, I need to know your long-term intentions for this company," Elena said without preamble. "Are we building something together, or are you preparing to sell us to the highest bidder?" Alexander's expression remained calm, but Elena noticed a slight tension in his jaw. "Elena, every business decision I make is evaluated on its potential for growth and profitability. That's how I've built Knight Industries into what it is today." "That's not an answer," Elena pressed. "That's corporate speak. I'm asking you as someone who has trusted you with my family's legacy. What happens to Martinez Industries in 5 years? Alexander stood and walked to the window overlooking the factory floor, watching the employees who had worked for the Martinez family for decades. "In 5 years, if everything goes according to plan, Martinez Industries will be a global leader in sustainable textile production. Whether it remains an independent company or becomes part of a larger organization will depend on market conditions and opportunities that we can't predict today." Elena felt a chill of realization. Her father had been right to be concerned. Alexander was keeping his options open, which meant that all of their growth and success could ultimately benefit someone else entirely. "I see," Elena said quietly. "So our partnership agreement gives you the right to make that decision without consulting me or my family." "Elena, business isn't personal," Alexander said, turning back to face her. "I've never made promises I couldn't keep, and I've never lied to you about my intentions." "No, you haven't lied," Elena agreed. "But you also haven't been completely honest about the fact that you see our company as a commodity to be traded rather than a legacy to be preserved." The tension in the room was palpable as they stared at each other across the conference table. Elena realized that despite the personal connection she had begun to feel with Alexander, he remained first and foremost a strategic businessman who would make decisions based on profit rather than emotion. "What do you want me to say, Elena?" Alexander asked. "Do you want me to promise that I'll never sell the company? Do you want me to guarantee that your family will maintain control forever? Those are promises that no responsible businessman can make." Elena gathered her papers and stood to leave. "What I want is honesty about your intentions and respect for what this company means to my family. But I'm beginning to think those might be unrealistic expectations." The week of Marcus Chen's wedding to Isabella Westbrook arrived with unexpected drama that would change everything for Elena. She had been working late in her office when her assistant Maria burst in with news that would shake the entire business community. "Elena, you need to see this immediately," Maria said, holding her tablet with a breaking news article displayed. "Marcus Chen's company, Chen Import-Export, has just filed for bankruptcy. The FBI is investigating them for financial fraud and money laundering." Elena stared at the screen, reading the details of how Marcus had been involved in illegal business practices for years. His company had been using fake invoices and offshore accounts to hide money, and several high-profile investors had lost millions of dollars. The wedding to Isabella Westbrook had been canceled when her family discovered the extent of his criminal activities. "My God," Elena whispered. realizing how close she had come to being involved in this scandal. If I had married him, I would have been connected to all of this. The news got worse over the next few days. Marcus had fled the country, leaving behind a trail of debts, angry investors, and legal troubles that would take years to resolve. The man who had abandoned Elena at the altar had turned out to be a criminal who would have destroyed her family's reputation and business. If she had become his wife, Elena found herself thinking about Alexander and how he had appeared in her life just months after the wedding disaster. The timing suddenly seemed less coincidental and more intentional. That evening, she called Alexander and asked him to meet her at Martinez Industries for an urgent conversation. "Alexander, I need to ask you something, and I want a completely honest answer," Elena said when he arrived at her office. "Did you know about Marcus Chen's illegal activities when you first approached me about the partnership?" Alexander sat down across from her desk, his green eyes serious and thoughtful. "Yes, Elena. I knew that Chen Import-Export was under investigation. My research into companies in this region included background checks on major players, including your former fiancé." Elena felt her breath catch. "So you knew that Marcus was a criminal when you decided to invest in my company?" "I knew he was under investigation," Alexander corrected. "I also knew that you had ended your relationship with him, which meant you were not involved in his business practices." "But Elena, that wasn't why I invested in Martinez Industries." "Then why?" Elena demanded. "Why did a billionaire investor suddenly decide to partner with a small family textile company run by a woman who had just been publicly humiliated?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Because I recognized something in you that day at the wedding. When Marcus didn't show up, when you realized you had been betrayed in front of everyone you knew, you didn't collapse. You didn't make a scene. You held your head high and walked out with dignity." Elena felt tears threatening, but she forced herself to maintain control. "That still doesn't explain why you invested millions of dollars in our company." "I investigated Martinez Industries because I was curious about you," Alexander admitted. "But I invested because the business fundamentals were solid and the growth potential was exceptional. Elena, even if I had never met you, your company would have been an attractive investment opportunity." Elena stood and walked to the window, processing this revelation. "So the business partnership is legitimate, but the personal interest came first?" "The personal interest made me notice you," Alexander said softly. "The business analysis made me invest. But Elena, working with you these past months has shown me that both decisions were right for reasons I never expected." Elena turned back to face him. "What do you mean?" Alexander stood and moved closer to her, his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "I mean that I started this as a business investment with personal curiosity, but somewhere along the way, I realized I was falling in love with the most remarkable woman I've ever met." The words hung in the air between them, changing everything about their relationship dynamic. Elena felt her heart racing as she processed what Alexander had just revealed. "Alexander," she said quietly, "how can I trust that this isn't just another business strategy? How do I know that your feelings are real and not just part of some elaborate plan?" "Because," Alexander said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I'm prepared to prove it in a way that goes against every business principle I've ever followed." He pulled out a legal document and placed it on Elena's desk. "This is a revised partnership agreement that transfers controlling interest in Martinez Industries back to your family. You would own 51% of the company, with full decision-making authority over its future." Elena stared at the document, hardly believing what she was seeing. "Alexander, this would cost you millions of dollars. Why would you give up control of a profitable investment?" "Because I realize that what I want most is not to own your company," Alexander said, his voice steady and sincere. "What I want is to be your partner in every sense of the word, in business, in life, and in building a future together." Elena picked up the document, scanning the legal language that would restore her family's control over their legacy. "This changes everything about our business relationship." "Yes, it does," Alexander agreed. "It means we would be true partners with equal say in major decisions. It means your family's legacy would be protected regardless of what happens between us personally." Elena looked up at him, seeing something in his eyes that she had never seen before: complete vulnerability and genuine love. "And what do you want in return for giving up millions of dollars in potential profits?" Alexander smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, the expression seemed entirely unguarded. I want a chance to prove that I love you for who you are, not for what I can gain from you. I want to build something together that neither of us could create alone. Elena set the document down and walked around her desk to stand directly in front of Alexander. You realize this is completely crazy from a business perspective? Completely crazy, Alexander agreed, reaching out to take her hands in his. But I've discovered that the most important decisions in life aren't always the most rational ones. Elena looked into his green eyes and saw her future reflected there. Not the future she had planned with Marcus, which would have ended in scandal and destruction, but a new future built on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and love that had grown from shared ambition and understanding. Alexander Knight, she said softly, I think you might just be the most romantic businessman in the world. Is that a yes to the revised partnership agreement? Alexander asked, his smile growing wider. It's a yes to everything, Elena replied, and when Alexander kissed her, she knew she was finally exactly where she belonged. 1 year after the failed wedding that had seemed like the end of Elena's world, she stood in the boardroom of the newly expanded Martinez Knight Industries, looking out at a company that had grown beyond her wildest dreams. The partnership with Alexander had transformed not just the business, but her entire understanding of what was possible when two people worked together toward a common goal. The company now employed over 500 people across 3 countries, with manufacturing facilities in sustainable textile production that had become the industry standard. Elena had been featured on the cover of Business Week magazine as Entrepreneur of the Year, and Martinez Knight Industries was being courted by major fashion brands around the world, but the most significant change was personal. Elena wore a simple engagement ring that Alexander had presented to her 3 months earlier, not in a grand public gesture, but in the quiet privacy of her office after they had successfully completed their largest international contract. Elena, there's someone here to see you, her assistant Maria announced, interrupting Elena's review of the quarterly reports. He says his name is Marcus Chen and that it's urgent. Elena felt her stomach drop. She hadn't heard from Marcus since his criminal activities had been exposed and he had fled the country. The fact that he was back and seeking her out could only mean trouble. Tell him I'm in meetings all day, Elena said firmly, and call security to let them know he's in the building. I already tried that, Maria said apologetically, but he says he won't leave until he speaks with you. He's claiming that Alexander Knight set him up and that you deserve to know the truth. Elena's mind raced as she considered the implications. Marcus had nothing left to lose, which made him dangerous, but she also knew that ignoring him might create more problems than confronting him directly. Fine, Elena decided. But call Alexander immediately and ask him to come here. I want witnesses to whatever Marcus is planning to say. 20 minutes later, Elena sat across from Marcus Chen in her conference room, with Alexander beside her and security guards stationed outside the door. Marcus looked haggard and desperate, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't hide the stress and fear in his eyes. Elena, you look incredible, Marcus began, his voice carrying the same charm that had once made her believe she loved him. Success suits you. What do you want, Marcus? Elena asked coldly. I have a busy schedule, and I assume you're here for a reason other than compliments. Marcus glanced at Alexander with obvious hatred, before turning back to Elena. I'm here to warn you about the man sitting next to you. Alexander Knight didn't just happen to find your company, Elena. He orchestrated everything, including my downfall. Elena felt Alexander tense beside her, but she kept her expression neutral. Explain what you mean. Knight Industries has been investigating my business for over 2 years, Marcus continued, his voice growing more agitated. Alexander knew about the financial irregularities long before they became public. He could have exposed me at any time, but he waited until after I left you at the altar. Elena looked at Alexander, who was staring at Marcus with controlled anger. Alexander, is this true? Parts of it are true, Alexander admitted quietly. Knight Industries did have information about Chen Import-Export's illegal activities, but Marcus is leaving out crucial details. Marcus leaned forward desperately. Elena, he destroyed my company to get to you. He wanted you available and vulnerable so he could swoop in as your savior. This whole relationship is built on manipulation and revenge. Elena stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Revenge? What exactly do you think Alexander was seeking revenge for? For you? Marcus exclaimed. "He was obsessed with you from the moment he saw you at our wedding. When I didn't marry you, it gave him the perfect opportunity to position himself as the better man." Alexander finally spoke, his voice deadly calm. "Marcus, you're pathetic. Elena doesn't need anyone to seek revenge on her behalf. She's perfectly capable of succeeding without your dramatic conspiracy theories. Then why don't you tell her the whole truth?" Marcus challenged. "Tell her that you've been planning to acquire Martinez Industries since before you ever met her. Tell her that your so-called love is just another business strategy." Elena felt the room spinning as she processed the accusations. She looked at Alexander, searching his face for any sign that Marcus might be telling the truth. "Alexander," she said quietly, "I need you to tell me exactly when you first learned about Marcus's illegal activities, and exactly when you decided to investigate my company." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and Elena's heart sank as she realized he was calculating his response rather than speaking from immediate honesty. "Elena, the timeline isn't as important as the results," Alexander said finally. "Whatever my initial motivations were, everything I've done has been in your best interests." "That's not an answer," Elena said, her voice growing stronger. "That's the same corporate non-response you gave me months ago when I asked about your long-term plans for the company." Marcus smiled triumphantly. "He can't tell you the truth because it would prove that I'm right. This whole thing has been an elaborate manipulation designed to make you dependent on him." Elena walked to the window, looking out at the factory floor where her family's employees worked steadily at their machines. Everything she had built over the past year suddenly felt uncertain and questionable. "Both of you get out," she said without turning around. "Marcus, if I see you anywhere near this building or my family again, I'll call the police. Alexander, we'll continue this conversation later when I've had time to think." After both men left, Elena sat alone in her conference room, staring at the engagement ring on her finger. The woman who had been abandoned at the altar a year ago had been naive and trusting. The woman she had become was stronger and more cautious. But was she any wiser about the men in her life? Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Elena, please don't let Marcus poison what we've built together. Yes, I investigated your company before we met, but everything I feel for you is real. Give me a chance to explain everything properly." Elena deleted the message without responding. She had learned that when someone's explanations became too complicated, it usually meant they were hiding something important. This time she would make her decisions based on facts rather than feelings, and she would protect her family's interests regardless of the personal cost. The next morning, Elena called an emergency meeting with her father, their attorney, and the board of directors. It was time to find out exactly what Alexander Knight's true intentions had been from the very beginning, and whether the partnership that had seemed like salvation was actually another form of betrayal. As she prepared for what might be the most important business decision of her life, Elena realized that the broken-hearted woman from the wedding disaster had finally evolved into exactly what she needed to be: a leader strong enough to face the truth, whatever it might cost her.